Today we are talking about the secret blueprint for humanity's evolution as we explore tarot cards in a way that you have never heard before. I am very excited about this topic, and it's very hard to summarize what we're going to be doing today because there are so many interesting aspects to this. We are diving deep into the tarot card system, but in a very interesting way where we are exploring it as it maps out the evolution of the human mind, the body, and the spirit. And as always, we're taking a look at this through a lens of logic and reason. So right away, if you're coming to this and you think, oh, tarot cards are a bunch of woo-woo and mystical nonsense, I understand where you're coming from, but we're going to be looking at this, like I said, in a logical way where we understand tarot cards not as being about telling the future or getting your fortune told or anything like that, but as symbolic representations of the unconscious mind, archetypal imagery. Now, this is something that's been talked about in psychology with regard to Carl Jung, the different images that come up through art and various different esoteric and occult symbolism. So what we're talking about here, we're going to be examining, like I said, through logic and reason, but it gets even deeper because not only are we taking a look at the tarot cards, but we're looking at the tarot cards as described through something called the Law of One. Now, if you're not familiar with the Law of One, well, get ready because this is also pretty crazy. The Law of One is a set of channeled messages that were channeled in the 1980s by a team called LL Research. And they channeled this entity that called itself Ra. And this is a being that claims to be a higher dimensional being, a collective mind that is communicating information to humanity. And there's a lot of information in the Law of One books. I have a whole playlist on it. So if you want to know more about what that is, go check it out. I have videos and playlists all about the Law of One. But one of the sections in the book is all about tarot cards. And Ra claims to be the originator or transmitter of the information of tarot cards as being a way to teach humanity about their own archetypal evolution. Now, also, I want to say, if that sounds out there or strange as well, remember, we're looking at this through logic and reason while being intuitively open. So I want to say outright that the Law of One, this channeled material, it could be fake. It could be bullshit. It could be a hoax. Or it could be a manifestation of the channeler's, Carla's, unconscious mind. Or it could be real. To be honest, we don't know, and we can't say for sure. However, the reason why I'm even talking about it is because regardless of where the information is coming from, it's very interesting information, and I think I think there's a lot that we can learn from it because it's an interpretation of the tarot that is very, very different. So, like, for example, we're going to be using the Egyptian tarot, and the Egyptian tarot is, I'm trying to make sure that you can see it, is what Ra claims to be the most accurate form of the tarot. And I think that it's a very beautiful tarot. And I'll be comparing it with the Rider-Waite deck so that just so you guys can, people are more familiar with things like the Fool. But in this interpretation, for example, the Fool isn't considered to be the Fool. It's called the Choice. And you have things like the Magician, where in this system, the Magician is considered the matrix of the mind instead of the Magician. And rather than having the Empress, or I'm sorry, the High Priestess, we have the potentiator of the mind, and rather than the Empress, we have the catalyst of the mind. And that's just an example to show you that what we're going to be talking about here is about the structure and evolution of human consciousness, the human mind, body, spiritual evolution as well, in a way that you probably haven't heard before. Now, I'm very excited about this topic, and I'm very interested in discussing it with you. And I want to tell you, if you enjoy this, seriously, please like and subscribe, leave comments, like the video, because this tells me what kind of content you guys would like. And I would like to make more content like this. And if you like this video, we will go into more detail and we will explore every card in the major arcana and explore how it unravels the evolution of the mind, the body, and the spirit. And we will go through each one systematically and do a deep dive, but only if you guys want to see it. If you guys aren't interested in these videos, then, I probably won't make them. But if you are, I would love to do videos on that. So again, please let me know by actually liking and liking this video so that we can, so that I know that you're interested and we can do more videos like this, because I would very much like to. So that being said, we're going to get started, but before we do, as always, like and subscribe. Also, if you enjoy my work, hey, consider supporting on Patreon. That is the best way to support my work. It's how I'm able to do this, make a living, make my videos, create my projects, write my books, all that. So consider supporting on Patreon, become a member on Patreon, or a member on YouTube at tier 2 or higher. And you get access to all of our members only videos. And we have a new members only video every single week. Like, that's a lot of content. And today we're having a members only video that's about how split brain surgery reveals the truth about consciousness, where we look at neuroscience and neurosurgery in terms of consciousness. Very, very interesting. So support there helps out a lot. Really appreciate it. Also, be aware there are scammers in the comments. There are people pretending to be me, saying to join my WhatsApp, saying to join my Telegram. Like, that's a bunch of BS. Don't do it. Okay, like, that's not me. Don't fall for it. I don't know who these people are. Also, I want to tell you that there are people out there who don't like what I'm doing and don't like the information that I'm spreading. They don't like what we're doing here. And so they're spreading a lot of information about me and what we do here. A lot of disinformation, a lot of misinformation. And so just keep your eyes open, use your reason, use logic. Don't fall for the BS and the lies that people are spreading around. All right. So here we go. We're talking about the Law of One, the tarot deck. We're talking about the evolution of human consciousness. And like I said, there's just so much to talk about here. I'm very excited to talk about with you. Through the lens of logic and reason, being tapped into intuition as well. Let's just start right away so that we can see what's going on. I think that's the best way to do it. We're going to do an overview. We're doing an overview of this tarot card system today. Today is going to be an overview of what this system is, what it's about, how it works, what kind of cards are used, etc. So we're going to open this up right away and start reading from or looking at information on the Law of One. And you can read all this information for free on lawofone.info. Now, before we read right away, I'm going to show you these cards on screen, and hopefully you can see them. Let me organize them a little better here. Okay, perfect. Now, if you can see this on screen, I want you to notice something here. There are 3 rows. The first row, the second row, the third row, and then there's one extra card. Each row is a row of 7 cards. Okay? The top row has 7, the middle row has 7, and the bottom row has 7. And what each of these do is they represent a different aspect of the experience of a soul. The first 7 represents the journey of the mind, or the evolution of the mind. The second set of 7 represents the body, and then the third set represents the spirit. And then the final card is called the choice, which replaces the fool. And everything, all of these cards, all of these 21 cards are leading up towards the final card, which is the choice, which is the fool, which is, according to Ra, the ultimate pinnacle of humanity's current consciousness. So this essentially, this tarot system is mapping out humanity's conscious evolution all the way up towards where they finally get to the final card, or the final point in their evolution, which is the choice, where they have to make a choice. And we're going to talk about what that choice is. But you can notice, see, this is a bit different, where you have the sun and an eclipse happening, representing polarity and duality. There's danger and a journey being taken where a choice has to be made. So we're going to be diving into that. But let's just start here. So for those unfamiliar with the Law of One, these are questions and answers by the LL Research Group. And again, I have videos. If you want to know more about what the Law of One is, I have an introductory video on it. Essentially, this is a set of channeled information, like I said. So the channeler's name is Carla, and the questioner's name is Don. So Carla is the channeler. So she goes into a trance state. Dawn is the questioner. Dawn asks questions. And Ra, the channeled entity, communicates through Carla. Now, here's the thing that I want to talk about. I know this can sound really wild and out there, but I don't want that to distract from the information. So if you're thinking like, okay, that's really crazy. What are you talking about? Aliens or channeled entities or what is all this BS? Try not to let that get to you. Try and just listen to the information, because the information is what's really cool, and really important. And like I say, ultimately, it doesn't matter where this information comes from. It's if it resonates, if it fits in with what we know about reality, if we can learn from it in a lucid way. But that being said, we are going to read what this entity says about tarot cards, which, like I said, are going to seem a little out there. We don't know if it's true. We don't know if it's not true, but it's still interesting, and we'll give a little bit of background and setup for what we're going to be talking about right now. Okay, so to be clear, we're going to hear a lot about the mind, the body, and the spirit. Okay, we're going to hear a lot about the mind, the body, and the spirit. And Ra considers, let's say, human bodies to be mind, body, spirit complexes. So a human being, in Ra's terminology, would be a mind, body, spirit complex. So in terms of the law of one and the raw material, mind is referred to as like the consciousness or thought processes of an entity. So mind is pretty straightforward. It's your mind, your thought processes, your consciousness. Body is the physical vessel of the mind and spirit. I think that's pretty much straightforward. It's the avatar. And spirit, now spirit in terms of the law of one and the raw material, is the eternal and infinite aspect of an entity. It's the part of an entity that is connected to the divine or the source of all things. It leads to higher states of consciousness, and the evolution and the growth of the spirit is the ultimate goal of existence. So the spirit is the eternal aspect of the entity. Now, in our system, in the Neogenian system, we consider the spirit and the mind to be the same thing. So for those familiar with our system, if this sounds a little confusing, that's because we equate the mind and the spirit as spirit is the mind. In other words, the mind is the soul. We are beings of infinite frequency, and these frequency patterns are what allow us to inhabit these bodies, or our bodies are controlled by these frequency patterns, and our minds are just filtered manifestations of that infinite energy. So in terms of our system, minds are spirit. The particular minds that we have through our human existence are just a filtered aspect of it. Okay? So it's a filtered aspect of mind. But so just to be clear though, it's just a difference in perspective. That's all. So it's a difference in words that we're using and ways we're defining things, but ultimately we're talking about the same thing here. We all have bodies, we all have thought processes, and we all have the eternal aspect of ourselves. In this material, these are termed as three different things. In our material, it's termed as two different things. Our thought processes are an aspect of our eternal self, a filtered version of our eternal self, because our eternal self is a system of thought and frequency. Okay, so I just want to get that out there right away. That if someone's wondering, I think that can be confusing to some people. So I want to point that out. Let's see. So starting here, the questioner, Don, says, could you please tell me the origin of the tarot? Ra says, I am Ra. The origin of this system of study and divination is twofold. First, there is that influence which, coming in a distorted fashion from those who were priests attempting to teach the law of one in Egypt, gave form to the understanding, if you will pardon the misnomer, which they had received. These forms were then made a regular portion of the learned teachings of an initiate. The second influence is that of those entities in the lands you call Chaldea, and Mesopotamia, who from old had received the, shall we say, data for which they called having to do with the heavens. Thusly, we find two methods of divination being melded into one with uneven results, the, as you call it, astrology, and the form being combined to suggest what you might call the correspondences, which are typical of the distortions you might see as attempts to view archetypes. Right, let me boil that down and explain exactly what's being said here. Don's saying, hey, can you tell me where tarot cards came from? And Ra says, yeah, sure. Ultimately, from two different places. The first is it came from the priests who were trying to teach the law of one. And what the law of one is what Ra claims to be the truth of existence, which is that we are one infinite mind. All reality is one infinite mind, hence the law of one, experiencing itself in diverse ways. So that's the message of the law of one. Ra claims to be the entity Ra that contacted the people of Egypt and tried to transmit this information to Egypt. However, Ra says that this information was distorted by the priests, so it wasn't taught in its full, complete form. So Ra is saying that tarot cards came from the priests attempting to teach the law of one, but it came with a distorted understandings. And it became a portion of the teachings of the initiates. So those who were initiated into the Egyptian mysteries were taught this. The second influences, he says, comes from Chaldea and Mesopotamia, and Ra claims that this is when astrology began to be mixed into it. And as we'll see, Ra's not a big fan of that. Ra doesn't really like the astrology. From what I gather, Ra seems to think that it makes things confusing and muddles things up. Here it says we find two methods of divination being melded into one with uneven results. And essentially saying that this has to do with attempts to view archetypes, but these attempts can be wrong, etc. So, sorry, I have an eyelash in my eye, and it's very distracting. So, and remember, and I always want to highlight this, we don't know if this is true. This could all be fantasy or manifestations of someone's unconscious, but I think it sets the stage for what we're going to be talking about, and it's still interesting. It's interesting to think about. So don't let that put you off if it does, because we have this is going to be some very interesting information that we're talking about here. So Don says, then am I correct in assuming that the priests in Egypt, in attempting to convert knowledge that they had received initially from Ra into understandable symbology, constructed and initiated the concept of the tarot? Is this correct? So essentially that's what we just said. Don is asking, hey, I'm assuming what you mean is that the priests in Egypt tried to convert the teachings of the law of one into a symbolic structure to teach to initiates. Is that true? That's what Don is saying. And Ra says, that is correct, with the addition of the Sumerian influence. So Ra is saying, yeah, that is one of the influences. The other influence came from Sumeria. And Don says, thank you. I would like to go back to the plan of the... Okay, now this gets quite interesting. Let's add another layer of wildness to this. So it says, thank you. I would like to get back to the plan of this logos for its creation and examine the philosophical basis that is the foundation for what was created in this local creation and the philosophy of the plan for experience. I am assuming that I am correct in stating that the foundation for this, as we have stated many times before, is the first distortion. After that, what was the plan in a philosophical sense? All right, so for some background here, we're talking about something called the logos, and then there's other entities called sub-logi. So the logos is what the law of one refers to as the one infinite mind. The one infinite mind is the logos. It is all reality. All things come from the one infinite mind, the logos. Now, within the logos, there are what are called sub-logi. And sub-logi, according to the law of one, are perspectives or emanations. Here, let me look at my notes here. So, sub-logi are individualized expressions of the universal logos. Different expressions, different forms, different sections of the universal mind. And they can be thought of as sub-creators or lesser creative entities that operate under the guidance of the universal logos. Each sub-logos is responsible for creating and governing a specific portion of the universe, such as a galaxy or a star system, or even particular planets, etc. So this idea is very interesting. You have the idea that reality is one mind, but there are different expressions of this one mind, and some of these expressions are called sub-logi, and they are involved with the governance and architecture of different sections of the universe, be of galaxies or solar systems, etc. Now, I really want to get away from this idea of, again, remember, this could all be BS. We don't know if it's true. We don't know if it's not true. It doesn't really matter ultimately, but it's interesting to think about. But if we are thinking about it in those terms, it wouldn't be this idea of like a creator god, right? It's not like a sub-logi isn't like a guy in the sky with a beard that goes, oh, I'm going to create Earth. And in 7 days, I created the animals and the plants and the humans and blah. No, it has to do more with like just more, think of it more as like cosmic forces subtly influencing the architecture of the universe. You could almost imagine it like this, right? So instead of thinking it like, oh, like a god that magically waves its wand and poof, there's animals now, and poof, there's humans now, and poof, there's plants, and there's a talking snake. Why not throw that into the mix? Not like that. So think of it more in terms of, think of terms of evolution happening. You're seeing animals evolve into different forms. So imagine perhaps an intelligence behind the scenes, or a collection of intelligence behind the scenes, subtly influencing evolution in a certain direction over billions of years, or something like that. You see, it's much more different. It's not a magic wand. Oh, there's animals now. It'd be like, okay, there is a pattern occurring. There's a mathematical form occurring, and we are going to influence that in a particular direction, in a particular way. And this section of the universe is the universe that we influence, etc. So this is what they're talking about with regard to this idea of sub-logi. Now, what does this have to do with tarot cards? I told you, this is some interesting stuff. So Don says, I am asking with respect to this particular logos, so the experience of its planetary systems and those sub-logi of it. So Ra says, I am Ra. This query has substance. We shall begin by turning to an observation of a series of concept complexes of which you are familiar as the tarot. So essentially, what Ra wants to do, okay, is what Don is basically asking. Don is basically asking, okay, what sort of pattern or structure did the sub-logi that is associated with our solar system use? Like, what is the structure there? And Ra is saying, this is an interesting question. Let's use tarot cards to explain it. So Ra says, this query has substance. We shall begin by turning to an observation of a series of concept complexes of which you are familiar as the tarot. The philosophy was to create a foundation, first of mind, then of body, and then of spiritual complex. Those concept complexes, which you called a tarot, lie then in 3 groups of 7. The mind cycle, 1 through 7, the physical complex cycle, 8 through 14, and the spiritual complex cycle, 15 through 21. The last concept complex may be best termed the choice. Okay? So this is what we are talking about. This is what I mentioned in the beginning here, where you can see the cards in terms of 3 sets of 7 and then a final card as the choice. So you have the first 3 sets of 7, which represents the mind cycle. The second set of 7 represents the body cycle, and the third set of 7 that represents the spirit cycle. And then the culmination of this represented in the final card down here, which is the choice. And this is, you can't see that, this card here, and its Rider-Waite analog would be the Fool, but you can see they're giving it a much more important role here. So what is this really being alluded to? So this is the answer to essentially how our experience here is structured. Ra is using tarot cards to explain how our experience here is structured. So upon the foundation of transformation of each complex, with free will guided by the root concepts offered in these cycles, the Logos offered this density, the basic architecture of a building and constructing and synthesizing of data culminating in the choice. So very interesting. These tarot cards represent an archetypal structure to reality. And according to Ra, this particular archetypal structure was orchestrated in such a manner by something called a sub-logi. So orchestrating a particular architecture, a particular structure, a particular mode of experience. Once again, not necessary for you to believe in that. It is what it is. But the information when we get to the cards is very, very cool, which is why we want to at least have a background understanding of where it's coming from in terms of the Law of One. So Don says, I'm probably having a problem with the concept of time, since it appears that the Logos was aware of the polarization choice. Okay, so we're talking about the polarization choice. Now, what is the polarization choice? See, you can see here the sun and the eclipse. At the top, representing this duality here. There's a lot of duality in this card, where in the original, or not the original, in the Rider-Waite interpretation, there's really not much of that here. It's much more emphasized. And so essentially, this duality, and essentially what the choice is, and so in the Law of One, once we're at according to the Law of One, humanity is a certain level known as third density. It's to transition into fourth density. Now, according to the Law of One, this transition can happen in 2 ways. Either humanity can choose the path of service to self or the path of service to others. Service to others has to do with love and empathy and the collective. Service to self has to do with selfishness, dominance, control, hierarchy, etc. Now, my opinion on this is that I think this is too basic. I don't think you can neatly parse reality into, there's service to self and there's service to other. And I think that that's too simplistic, too much of a simplistic way to look at it. However, in a broad, overarching, generalized way, I think you can at least look at reality as being a pull towards collective unity, or chaos and violence and disharmony and disunity. I think you can, in a very broad way, look at it like that. So I just want to say, I don't particularly agree with Ra's interpretation that, it's only service to self or only service to other. I don't think that's really a good way to look at reality. However, I still think you can understand reality as culminating in a choice that needs to be made. And I think we can take that from it, that there is a choice that needs to be made. And I think we can understand that right now with everything going on in humanity, in the world. We can understand, we can see this choice between, empathy and collective unity and backwards old ways of doing things. So I just want to point that out, that I don't particularly agree with this service to self or service to other dichotomy, but we can still learn from this, very much so, and I think that's just a minor thing. But I want you to understand this in terms of, because this is going to play an important part, right? This idea of having to choose, because regardless, humanity does have to make a choice. So let me just real quick, let me tell you what I think the choices are here for humanity. The choices here are for humanity either one, we all blow each other up, and it's the end of modern civilization, and that's it. Everything stops here. Or we choose to rise to a new level of consciousness and create a new, and that's our goal as Neogenians, to create a new beginning, a new consciousness, and a new earth through a planetary civilization, a teleocratic society that's based on purpose to increase the quality of life for every individual and the collective, where we are all working together in harmony to build a new world with all awareness, and awareness that we are all reality experiencing itself through each other, and we are co-creators on this mission together to create better and cultivate higher modes of experience and learning and understanding. All right, that's, humanity could take that path too. Instead of nuking the world, we could take that path. However, there's also another path that can be taken, in which a slave framework forms, in which it's a coerced unity, in which a very negative structure is put into place, most likely to do with the billionaire elite class ruling the world, but it doesn't have to be that way. It can be any elite class that asserts forceful dominance in a coercive way instead of allowing humanity to grow into a new state of consciousness. So it has to do with the establishment of a negatively oriented elite that essentially creates the world into a slave-like framework, and you get unity in that way. You do get unity, and you can get a higher level of consciousness to a degree, but it's going to be a very malformed, dark, slave-like type of existence that ultimately benefits the elite at the expense of many, many others. So while I don't completely agree with the way that Rob terms things, we can still understand that humanity in its journey right now has a very important choice to make. And that is how we can understand, and how we're going to understand, this card, the choice. And remember, the choice is the final card in humanity's current journey on the particular level of consciousness that it's at right now. For it to go to the next level of consciousness, it has to make this choice, according to this material. So let's see. So Don says, I'm having a hard time with the concept of time, since it appears that the Logos was aware of the polarization choice. It seems that this choice for polarization at the end of third density is an important philosophical plan for the experience past third density. Am I correct in assuming that this process is a process to create the proper or the desired experience that will take place in the creation after third density is complete? So basically, in short, what Don is saying is the choice, or it seems that this choice for polarization at the end of third density is an important philosophical plan for the experience past third density. And then so Ra replies, I am Ra. These philosophical foundations are those of third density. Above this density, there remains the recognition of the architecture of the logos, but without the veils which are so integral a part of the process of making the choice in third density. So basically what this is saying is that the philosophical foundations, this archetypal architecture of the tarot, the archetypal architecture of the tarot represents humanity's journey in its third density consciousness, or at the consciousness that it's currently at right now. And what is third density consciousness? We can understand this as self-awareness. Humanity is self-aware. It's not yet all aware. We're trying to get humanity to the next level, which is all awareness, which is a recognition that we are in an interconnected, united system. So Ra is saying that the philosophical architecture is related to this journey that humanity is at right now. Above third density, when you reach that higher state of awareness, you recognize the architecture of existence, but without the veils, which are so integral a part of the process of making the choice in third density. What are the veils? Veils are the permeable or penetrable separation between the conscious and the unconscious mind. So essentially what Ra is saying is, once one is elevated to this new level of consciousness, you're at the point where you're recognizing the architecture of existence in a more clear way. You're understanding it in a more lucid way. It's not veiled anymore by the unconscious. The unconscious is beginning to become conscious. Now, this is why in the Neogenian system, particular in inner star actualization, we talk about why it's so important to make the unconscious conscious. And it's about piercing that veil and allow us to access the unconscious mind so that we can be aware of the architecture of existence. And the mirror self is very important for that. But let's continue. There's so much to talk about here. So, and remember, we're just laying the groundwork here. This is stuff that's quite in depth. So, Don says, in that case, you would have as a logos, you would have the advantage of selecting the form of acceleration, I might say of spiritual evolution, by planning for what we call the major archetypical philosophical foundation and planning these as a function of the polarity that would be gained in third density. Is this correct? And Ra says, I am Ra. This is exquisitely correct. So essentially what this is saying is that the architecture for our experience, our archetypal experience, was selected in such a way to accelerate spiritual evolution. So you can imagine that spiritual evolution happens at a certain rate, but that our experience was architectured in a certain way to accelerate our spiritual evolution. Don says, in that case, it seems that a knowledge of the precise nature of these philosophical foundations would be of primary importance to the study and evolution of mind, body, and spirit. And I would like to carefully go through each of the basic 21 cards, starting with the mind, if this is agreeable with Ra. So now we get into the idea of why we're even talking about the tarot, right? So this is because you want to wonder, like, okay, how did the Law of One even come to the concept of tarot cards? Like, that seems really weird. If you read the rest of the books, it's mostly about the nature of reality, and tarot cards are, some might wonder, why are we even talking about tarot cards? So basically what Don is saying here is like, okay, so from what I am understanding correctly, our existence is formed by an archetypal structure. And this archetypal structure was formulated in such a way to accelerate our spiritual evolution. And tarot cards are a symbolic way to understand what this archetypal architecture is. So, Ra, if it's okay with you, I want to go through the 21 cards of the tarot so we can understand the archetypal architecture of the universe, the mind, the body, and the spirit with regard to the human experience within the current level of consciousness that it is at. And Ra says, I am Ra. This is agreeable with two requests, which must be made. Firstly, that an attempt to be made to state the student's grasp of each archetype. We may then comment. We cannot teach learn. And Ra says things like teach learn or learn teach, because remember, Ra considers all reality to be a single mind and everything to be an expression of the single mind. So when one teaches someone, learning is happening at the same time because it's the same. The mind of reality is both teaching and learning at the same time. One aspect of itself is teaching, the other aspect of itself is learning. So this is why Ra will say things like teach learn or learn teach. So Ra says, sure, we can do this. We can study the tarot in terms of the archetypal structure of mind, body, and spirit. However, there are two things. First, that an attempt be made to state the student's grasp of each archetype. So first, Ra wants Dawn, or whoever is going to be questioning, which it will be Dawn, to say what they think the archetype means so that they can then comment on it. Because everyone's going to interpret tarot cards differently. So Ra wants to know, well, what do you think this card means first? Secondly, we request that it be constantly kept before the mind as the candle before the eye, that each mind-body-spirit complex shall and should and indeed must perceive each archetype, if you use this convenient term, in its own way. Therefore, you may see that precision is not the goal, rather quality of general concept complex perception is the goal. And this is one of the reasons why, see, now we're moving away from kind of the more wild ideas of logi and sub-logi and different parts of the architecture of the universe. Now we're getting into the real, starting to get into the heart of it. And this is why I really like this interpretation of it. Well, so many reasons, but I want to elucidate some of the reasons here. And one of the reasons is because I think this is how. So for how I view tarot cards, okay? Tarot cards are not a tool for seeing into the future. They can't tell you the future. They can't do anything like that. What they are is a symbolic system of archetypes. And because they're a symbolic system of archetypes, they can help unlock your intuition and unlock your unconscious mind. Why? Because your unconscious communicates through archetypal symbols. So cards allow one to access this. I did a whole video on this called What Tarot Cards Really Are. Check that out if you want to know more. So this matches very, very well with how I view tarot cards, in that it's very important for the person reading the card to be using it and understanding it and interpreting it in a way that is resonant with their unconscious and their structure. So Ra is kind of highlighting this in a really cool way. Ra is saying like, okay, look, we can do this, but first I want to know what you think of the card so that we can comment on it. And second, you have to remember that every person should perceive every archetype in its own way. So each person is going to interpret an archetype in its own way. And Ra says, therefore, you see that here, precision isn't the goal. It's the quality of general concept that is the goal. And this is what's really important because we talk so much here about logic and reason, and we are still in the realm of logic and reason, but here we have to realize that we are shifting from an objective study of reality to entering into an intuitive form of understanding existence. And if we're looking at reality in its objective structure, like let's say we're doing physics, that's all about precision. It's all about quantity, not about quality. You can physically model a system extremely precisely, mathematically, and it always means the same thing every single time. However, when we're doing things with tarot cards, we're entering into the dreamy world of intuition, where we're talking about symbolism and allegory and metaphor and story. And Ra's basically saying, you can't be precise here. So everyone's going to interpret these things differently. And just remember here, the goal isn't extreme precision. It's not about quantity, quantifying. It's about quality. It's about the quality of it, so that a general understanding of concepts can be understood. We're in the realm of symbol, metaphor, and analogy, and allegory. And we just have to realize that we have to understand this in a different way. We're using a different method here. We're using an intuitive method rather than a formal logical method. And there's nothing wrong with using an intuitive method. It's very powerful, as long as afterwards, then we examine it with logic and reason to make sense of it. So for example, we can use cards to be like, okay, archetypally, I'm getting all this information. Wow, it seems really good. And after we use our intuition to gather all this information, after we do that, we're in this dreamy world of allegory and symbolism, and we're exploring our unconscious and looking at the cards. After we do all that, then we need to take a step back, look at it logically and rationally, and go, okay, what makes sense here? What is true? What can we use? What can't we use? What is true? What is not true? So let's continue. And I just think that that's really cool that, Ra is pointing this out. So Don says, then our particular logos, when it created its own particular creation, was at some point far down the evolutionary spiral of the experiment, with the significator becoming what it was not, or in effect, creating the polarity we strive for in third density, and therefore was, I am assuming, primarily concerned in the design of the archetypes, is designing them in such a way so as they would create the acceleration of this polarization. Is this in any way correct? And Ra says, we would only comment briefly. It is generally correct. You might fruitfully view each logos and its design as the creator experiencing itself. So what I gather from this is kind of interesting. We're going a little bit back to the logos and sub-logi thing. What I believe that Don is essentially saying is that the sub-logi responsible for the architecture of our current experience here, influencing that architecture, was far down the evolutionary spiral of the experiment. Meaning, from what I think I understand here, is that this entity, form of mind or whatever, took a very long time to get to where it is evolutionarily. Because if you could understand it in such a way, okay, so what this sub-logi, according to this, does is concerned in designing of the archetypes in such a way to accelerate polarization, or essentially evolution, because they equate polarization as being necessary for evolution. So they're saying that this entity designed the archetypes in such a way to accelerate evolution. And what essentially this in my opinion, what this means is that this sub-logi itself took a very long time to evolve, because it didn't have someone designing archetypes for it to accelerate its evolution. It kind of had to learn the hard way, or by brute force. It took a long time. You can, imagine it like this. Imagine having a kid and never having it go to school at all. It just has to learn just by brute experience, by trial and error. It's going to take a very long time for that child to learn something, compared to a child who goes to school, where they learn mathematics and reading and language and writing and history. So from what I gather, what I think they're trying to say here is that the sub-logi was a bit like this child that didn't have a school, took a long time to learn a lot of things, but now that it knows a lot of things, it designed a school for us to be able to have our evolution more accelerated. Okay, so again, we don't know if this is true. Could be all BS. But if it is true, if it is, I want to remind you that if it were to be true, it wouldn't be like waving a magic wand and creating things. Remember, what archetypes really are mental programs. They're mental programs. So you can think of it as sort of like designing software that's running in the background. It's not sort of this magical idea that people may think. It has a lot to do more, think of it more like a computer programmer in the background, adjusting and altering different programs and different pieces of code. And so these programs or pieces of code would have developed in our minds on their own naturally, but it would have taken a long time. So this architectural design is to make the process happen faster, to speed it up, to be able to give us more access to the archetypes in an easier way. And archetypes are just patterns of information, code. That's essentially what archetypes are. They are presented in our unconscious mind as symbols and metaphors. So real quick, I'll give you an example if you're not familiar with archetypes. The shadow self. The shadow self can represent itself in your dreams as a demon, a monster, a grotesque entity that's chasing you. This is the symbolic representation of the archetype of the shadow. But what is the shadow? The shadow is a reservoir for all the aspects of yourself that were cut off from your unconscious. And so you can think of the shadow self as being like the trash bin on your computer. It's all the things that you deleted from your ego consciousness. Except the problem with the shadow is that you can't empty the trash can. It just stays in there, and the programs that you put in there don't stop running. They still run and affect your life. You're just not aware of them anymore. These aren't perfect examples. These are metaphors and analogies. And they're not particularly talking about things like the shadow self here. They're talking about other forms of archetypes. But this is what an archetype, you can see that an archetype is just a pattern, a structure of the mind. It has a certain purpose and it serves a certain function, but it manifests in the mind in a certain way. Like you can think of the mother archetype as well. The mother archetype can manifest in your dream as like Gaia, Mother Earth, nature, even your own mother or something like that. But it's the pattern of nurture and care and empathy that we can all access and exhibit. All right. So let's see. Okay. So some more wild things here. Don says, thank you. I would like to ask you, as the initial production of the tarot, where this concept was first formed and where the tarot was first recorded. Where was the very first concept? And Ra says, I am Ra. The concept of tarot originated within the planetary influence you call Venus. Don says, was the concept given to, let me ask, you say it originated there. Was this concept devised for a training tool for those inhabiting Venus at that time, or was it devised by those of Venus as a training tool for those of Earth? Ra says, I am Ra. The tarot was devised by the third density population of Venus, a great measure of your space-time in your past. As we have noted, the third density experience of those of Venus dealt far more deeply and harmoniously with which you would call the relationship with other selves, sexual energy transfer work, and philosophical or metaphysical research. The product of many, many generations of work upon what we conceive to be the archetypal mind produced the tarot, which was used by our people as a training aid in developing the magical personality. I just laugh because this is quite an advanced topic, right? You're getting things like tarot, you're getting things like aliens, you're getting things like archetypes, you're getting things like the magical personality. Like what is all this? What is this? What's going on here? So, according to Ra, Venus is where the tarot was developed. Now, one thing that has to be noted here is that the way Ra talks sometimes is that if say one is, oh, well, it originated on Venus, sometimes it's unclear if that means literally the planet Venus or a planet or collective of people that was influenced by what the archetype of Venus stands for, like love and connectivity and unity. So that's something to throw out there. sometimes it's hard to tell when symbolic, when it's being talking about archetypally, and when it means literally. But anyway, according to Ra, long time ago, the entities of Venus were much more evolved than us. In other words, it says they were deeply and harmoniously advanced, which would with relationships with other selves, sexual energy, and philosophical or metaphysical research. So in other words, unlike us, the people of Venus were much better with other selves. In other words, recognizing themselves in others, sexual energy transfer, connecting, philosophical and metaphysical research. And after many generations of work on the archetypal mind, produced the tarot as a training aid in developing the magical personality. All right, what's the magical personality? In terms of the Neogenian system, the magical personality is what we call the power self. The magical personality is essentially the part of yourself that you develop and access that is a very commanding force that allows you to enact your will. And this isn't any kind of woo-woo, like, oh, I'm gonna, like the Force in Star Wars, when I command my magical personality and think really hard, I'm gonna manifest this thing in my life. No, it's more like psychology. You're accessing the part of yourself filled with confidence and power that allows you to go out and accomplish those things in the world that you want to accomplish. It's about accessing your power. Because remember, magic is about causing change to occur according to will, not in any kind of woo-woo way, but in terms of the Neogenian system, this is what we call will forming, to get away from the sort of woo-woo aspect of it and incorporate many other elements as well. Giving form to what you will through will forming is about understanding how to manifest your ideas in reality, but not in a magic way, by understanding goals, intention, will, planning, and action, and having all these harmonized to be able to enact one's will. And the power self plays a very big part in this, because this is where your confidence and power and whatnot stems from, which allows you to go out and do these sorts of things. Is this not focusing on my face? Is it focusing on my microphone rather than my face? I feel like my face is blurry. Probably because I've been doing this so much. My camera's probably very confused and doesn't know what to focus on. Whatever, you don't need to look at my face. Listen to my words. So Don says, I'll make a guess that those of Venus third density, who were the initial ones to partially penetrate the veil, gleaned information as to the nature of the archetypal mind and the veiling process, and from this designed the tarot as a method of teaching others. Is this correct? It is so. All right, so basically Don is saying, look, the people of Venus were able to pierce the veil, access the unconscious, and by accessing the unconscious, they raised their consciousness and understood the archetypal nature of existence. And when they understood the archetypal nature of existence, they designed the tarot as a method to try and teach others this archetypal structure. And Ross says, yeah, that's what happened. You're right. Yeah, you got it. I'm going to try and go a little faster here, so that we actually have time to get through this introduction to the tarot. So apologies if I don't go into as much detail. I would really like to, but I also want to get through this so that we can complete the introduction. And by the way, if you notice this highlighted section, I'm skipping a lot too. So remember, you can all go read this on thelawofone.info for free. So Ross says, the archetypal mind is a great and fundamental portion of the mind complex, one of its most basic elements and one of the richest sources of information for the seeker of the one infinite creator. To attempt to condense the archetypes is to make an erroneous attempt. Each archetype is a significant ding an sich, or thing in itself, with its own complex of concepts. While it is informative to survey the relationships of one archetype to another, it can be said that this line of inquiry is secondary to the discovery of the purest gestalt or vision or melody with each archetype signifies to both the intellectual and intuitive mind. All right, so what Ra is basically saying, each of these archetypes, right, and each one of these cards signifies a different archetype, a different pattern, a different function, a different mode. All right. And Ra is basically saying each one of these is a thing unto itself. If you want, you can try and look at them relationally, but that's not really how it should be done. You really shouldn't look at them relationally. You should look at them as a thing unto their self. The relational aspect is secondary to the understanding each archetype on its own. And so how this can be kind of understood is, again, if you think of apps on your phone, each app has a specific purpose and function. And to understand how these apps work is to understand each purpose and function of the app. Seeing how the apps work together isn't always fruitful. Sometimes it can be if you have certain apps that maybe one app is about making your pictures look higher quality, and then another app is about adding a filter, and then another app is about adding stickers. These apps are all kind of involved in the process of creating your picture. But the point is being said here is that really these archetypes are things in themselves, things in itself, Ding an sich, and which means thing in itself in German, and its own complex of concepts. And so it's best to understand them individually, what each archetype signifies to the intellectual and intuitive mind. And I really like Ra's emphasis on both like intellectual and intuition. All right, so Don says, were the court arcana and the minor arcana a portion of Ra's teaching, or was this something that came along later? I am Ra. Those cards which you speak of were the product of the influence of those of Chaldea and Sumer. So from what I understand is Ra is saying that the minor arcana came from Chaldea and Sumer, basically saying, Ra is saying that the major arcana, the 21 plus the choice for 22, those are really the important cards. The major arcana are the ones that really reflect the archetypal mind, according to Ra in this system. So Don says, I have here a deck of 22 cards, which has been copied according to the information we have from the walls of the large pyramid of Giza. If necessary, we can duplicate these cards in the book we are preparing. I would ask Ra if these cards represent an exact replica of that which is in the Great Pyramid. And Ra says, I am Ra. The resemblance is substantial. So Don then says, then are you saying that the cards that we have here are the best available cards in our present illusion at this date? Ra says, I am Ra. Your statement is correct, is that we consider the so-called Egyptian tarot the most undistorted version of the images which Ra offered. This is not to intimate that other systems may not in their own way form an helpful architecture for the adept's consideration of the archetypal mind. So this is why we are using the Egyptian tarot. We are using the Egyptian tarot because we're taking a look at this in terms of the context of the Law of One, in which the Law of One believes or states that it is the most accurate or the most undistorted version of what Ra attempted to communicate. However, they say that that's not to say that other systems couldn't also be helpful for the adept's consideration of the archetypal mind. Because remember, like Ra said, it's not about being precise here. It's about the overall intuitive general understanding of concepts. And this is why I say if certain decks resonate with you more than others, you should go with the ones that resonate with you more. To a certain degree, you have to make sure that they're somewhat structured. It can't be just someone who doesn't know anything about tarot, just doing whatever or making something that's commercial or... Okay, here's what I mean. It should actually resonate with you rather than you just being aesthetically drawn to it. There's a difference. Resonating with you intuitively rather than just being aesthetically pleasing. Like for me, I really enjoy the imagery of the Rider-Waite deck. I feel the Rider-Waite deck really allows me to unlock my intuition. It easily allows my mind to project unconscious contents and for me to translate those. Aesthetically speaking, it's okay. Like I've seen much better decks that I think are much prettier and you know, would be nice art to have on the wall. But as far as resonating with the unconscious, like, okay, I'm really feeling my intuition being unlocked here. It's a great canvas for projection. So that's the important thing. You want to find one that resonates with your unconscious rather than one that you just find aesthetically pleasing. It's a big difference and an important difference. Don says, are there any other uses at all of value of these images or tarot cards than the one I just stated? Ra said, I am Ra. To the student, the tarot offers a resource for learn teaching the process of evolution. To any other entity, these images are pictures and no more. That's one of the important things to understand here. For most people, these are just pictures. Or they're a fun party trick to talk about with your friends, or, oh, they'll tell me my future or whatever. But Ra is saying what this really is about learning the process of evolution. Don says, I was specifically thinking of the fact that Ra, in an earlier session, spoke of the tarot as a system of divination. Could you tell me what you mean by that? I am Ra. Due to the influence of the Chaldees, the system of archetypal images was incorporated by the priests of that period into a system of astrology-based study, learning, and divination. This was not a purpose for which Ra developed the tarot. So again, Ra really seems to be distancing itself from the astrological interpretation and divination. Ra is saying that later on, astrology entered the picture and people started to use it for divination. This isn't what we intended for the tarot to be. We used the major arcana and didn't have astrological influence in it, and it wasn't for divination. It was about understanding the process of evolution and the archetypal mind. And Ra says, as we have said, this set of images is not that which we gave. This is not material. We could use any of a multitude of devised tarot sets. Although this must be at the discretion of the questioner, we suggest the maintaining of one and only one set of distorted images to be used for the querying, and note that the images you now use are good. So essentially Don was again asking, because remember, they're getting ready to dive into the explanation of all these different cards and what they mean. And Don's like, okay, well, is this particular deck a good one to use? Referring to the Egyptian tarot, the one that we're going to use and compare with the Rider-Waite. And Ra's basically saying like, hey, these aren't the images that we gave. Earlier they said that it's the closest ones that we have access to as humans today when we go to Barnes and Noble and go shopping for tarot decks. These are the closest ones that exist. But Ra is saying, remember, these aren't the images that we gave. They're the closest, but they aren't the images that we gave. But Ra says, but this doesn't matter. This is not material. We could use any tarot set. Because remember, Ra emphasizes this isn't about precision. This is about the connection to with the learner's archetypal connection to these cards and understanding the symbolic influences in that way. It's about quality for general concepts, not precision. And some people might be turned off by that, but remember, there's different aspects of understanding reality. When we want to be precise, we're talking about logic, philosophy, mathematics, and the formal structure of existence. We can be extremely precise there. Here, we're delving into the world of intuition, which is a different mode of experience and understanding. And remember, these have to work together. Like the right side of the brain works with the left side of the brain. We have to use these together in a synergistic way and not be like how most of society condemns one or the other, where scientists may be like, oh, all that's a bunch of woo-woo mystical nonsense. And then you have mystics who are like, oh, well, all that, that's too rigid and confining. We have to use them in harmony in a synergistic way. Use our intuition to connect to the source of reality and glean insights, and examine those insights with hard logic and reason to make sure that they are indeed grounded in reality and not going to crazy places, and using logic and reason to study the formal structure of reality so we can understand the context in which we have experiences here in a very precise way. But Ra is basically saying, hey, you could use any deck, just make sure that you're consistent with it. Stick with the, for the remainder as we dive into these cards, stick with the same one, but the ones you're using are good. We could use any, but yeah, these are probably the closest. So the very next thing that occurs is to start out with the first card, which is the Magician. Now, remember, the Magician is card number 1. And in the, let's see, Egyptian tarot, the Magician is represented by this card here. And according to Ra, this is not the Magician, but rather the matrix of the mind. And this is going to begin to explore the very first foundational archetype of the mind complex, which is the matrix of the mind. And if you guys like this, that's what we're going to look at next time, because I'm looking at the time and I have already gone way over time, and this was just the introduction. So I hope you enjoy this, and I want to know if you enjoy this. Like I said, if you do, like this video, leave comments so I know that you do. If you guys are interested in this sort of thing, then we will absolutely begin. This was just the intro. We will absolutely begin the journey going through the cycle of the mind, the cycle of the body, the cycle of the spirit, culminating in the choice. And we will begin next time with the Magician as the matrix of the mind. So again, like, comment, let me know if that is what you want to see. Tell me. And as always, hey, check out my other videos. I did another video called The Real Purpose of the Tarot. What tarot cards really are. If you want to know more about my interpretation of the tarot as being a system of symbolic imagery. And if you enjoy my work, please consider supporting on Patreon or becoming a member on YouTube. That's how I'm able to make a living and do my work and create these videos and spread this information. So it helps out a lot. Go to patreon.com/MorgueOfficial or hit the join button below on YouTube. And if you join on tier 2 on YouTube or any tier on Patreon, you get access to all of our members only videos and a new members only video every week. And we're having one right in just like 20 minutes or so. Also, remember, hey, this isn't church, so don't feel obligated to support monetarily. You don't have to. There are plenty of free ways you can support, like liking, subscribing, and sharing. But I really appreciate the support, so thank you to everyone who does, especially Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, the Halloween Mom, DB, Enki, Nusalina, Paul Rogers III, Eric Fire, Masan, Christopher Smith, and everyone else. Thank you very much.